Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal. Today, we're going to talk about a wide variety of topics, with the big one being Jack Dorsey of Twitter has stepped down as CEO. Good morning, D. How you doing?
I am doing okay. I think you and I were just talking a little bit about COVID Omicron, which reminds me of Omnicron from the original Transformers movie, which is far superior to the live action Transformers movies.
See, I thought it just sounded like a new tech company. They're like,
It
oh, did you hear about
does.
Omicron? Look what they're doing.
Well, those all overlap, right? Like I'm waiting for the Rodimus Prime startup to come around. But yeah, Omicron. We knew this was going to happen. There's going to be more mutations, more versions of this. Right now, they don't know very much, as far as I know, about Omicron, about how it affects people, how it is transmitted relative to Delta or the original COVID-19 that we dealt with. So it is another one of those waiting games to see what's going on.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because the announcement basically regarding this variant or mutation came right after Thanksgiving, which obviously I'm sure they were aware of it prior to Thanksgiving, but probably didn't want to, you know, freak anyone out or anything
Mhm.
like that until afterwards. But did you have a chance to at least see your family and hang out and find a safe way to kind of enjoy the holiday?
Yeah, enjoy is a strong word because when you are in a household with a chef and Thanksgiving rolls around, it is a time of stress and Thanksgiving dinner. We kind of whittled things down a little bit this year, so we were only cooking for one whole day and not for like the whole week.
Hey.
But yeah, it's it's always a stressful time.
Yeah. So you didn't just go over to Whole Foods and get the Thanksgiving box, take it home and just heat it up and say, "Hey everyone, here's Thanksgiving."
No, there's a thing called pride that exists, and I mean you've got to cook your own food
How
for
dare you, man?
Thanksgiving.
How dare you? One year we actually did get
Well,
we
if you're
did get
having
those
yes,
buns.
if you're having yes,
Yeah.
we're definitely thinking about like, hey, you know what? Maybe Hawaii looks great for Thanksgiving next year.
That'd be fun though. I mean, I know. So here's what I've got from. Well, first, let me say one thing. We have gotten one of those boxes from Whole Foods before, and it was really good. Like they had like amazing turkey, all that kind of stuff in there. Usually we cook. Obviously, my wife, and she's like really big into cooking, and my parents
Mhm.
and that kind of stuff. But I think it was just like a lighter year or something, so we ended up getting some of the stuff from them in one of those boxes, and it was really good. Just to call that out. But it was funny. I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, maybe it's just we should take off for Thanksgiving and go to Hawaii or something like that, and just enjoy the beach and the weather. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the like hot surf time too. Like the season gets kicked off at the end of October, so it'd be fun to watch all the surfers. But here's the question for you: being in a tropical climate, do you feel like it's going to take away from like the spirit
No.
of the holiday, or you
No.
don't even
No.
care?
No. Thanksgiving? No. No.
Yeah, that one's
No.
not on the radar. I don't think, right?
No. Like, there's no spirit of Thanksgiving. It's just okay. This is now work.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, here's the thing: if you are in a position where you don't have to cook or clean
Uh huh.
and you can just sit back and enjoy things, that is fantastic. You get a lot of great food. You watch some football or some movies. You go and maybe like Christmas stuff starts to kick off. That's great. If you are responsible for hosting, or cooking or cleaning or any of that stuff, then like, I mean, for us, it's like, oh, hey, it's the Friday before. We got to really start planning out our grocery shopping even in order to get
Mhm.
everything set. We got to plan out when we're going to start defrosting turkeys if they're frozen, and then 2 or 3 days before we got to start prepping the veggies and brining the turkey, all that kind of stuff. Like if you're making stuffing from scratch, you've got to have 2 or 3 days of that bread usually cut up and sitting out in order for it to get stale enough in order to use it for stuffing.
Yeah, I mean, as a family, we're usually pretty exhausted by the time Thanksgiving's over because,
Oh yeah,
with my wife who loves to do her dish and then my mother-in-law and then my parents and everybody, it's like everyone's kind of tackling their own things. But, you end up saying, oh, we'll also make this and I'll also make that. Maybe we'll also make a pie. And next thing you know, you're like completely
oh yeah.
exhausted. You eat the food. The best part of it, though, is the leftovers because I feel like you have a couple of days where you don't have to cook at home because you can just eat all the leftovers, which are usually super tasty.
This is true. Yes. Thanksgiving leftovers. We should be able to just skip to that.
That'd be awesome.
All right. So we got a bunch of news to talk about today.
I know, I know. The big one. You want to jump in and talk about the big one? I got some thoughts on this.
So Jack Dorsey has announced that he is stepping down as the CEO of Twitter, which for some people I'm sure feel is a little late.
Sorry,
Now,
I'm clapping because I feel like he could probably do even more amazing things with Square if he just focused on one company. I kind of feel the same way about Elon Musk. I feel like if he just did one company, it would be even bigger than it is.
well, I think it should be highly avoided to have somebody be CEO of multiple major companies at the same time.
I agree.
Uh, but it's worth pointing out this is not the first time that Jack Dorsey has been not CEO of Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
There was a period in which he was not CEO previously, and then he was kind of asked to come back, and that was, I believe, he was already running Square at the time.
Yep.
So, but at the same time, I think for me the most interesting thing is that Jack Dorsey kind of felt like a very kind of hands-off CEO as far as the direction of the company.
Uh-huh.
For the most part, see, Twitter has felt somewhat directionless. It's kind of like it reminded me of like Craigslist, where it was just kind of in this stasis, where it's this almost service that's being provided to everybody, where they can like communicate in this way, but it's kind of become almost a meme for not providing any advancement or new features or anything. They
Yeah,
might
no,
just want to try to
I
buy
think you
Vine or
nailed
something
it.
now then.
I
Yeah.
think you nailed it when you said like Craigslist, because there was a time when everyone was like, Craigslist is so awesome. And it really was, right? It was like this new representation of the classified ads, but then no innovation. I mean, little things, kind of like Twitter did, little things here and there, Twitter spaces and stuff like that. But for the most part, just little stuff. And it just
Yeah.
kind of sits and it's stagnant and you're just kind of
Yeah.
keeping it moving. And it's time for like big innovation, change, whatever comes its way, you know?
Yeah. And most of the things that it has released have been very, from a technical standpoint, relatively easy to implement, like doubling the character limit, which was there because of text message limitations previously. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
even think the text message limitations are even there anymore. And I definitely don't think that too many people are using SMS in order to tweet.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but you look at the other things that they've implemented. They've implemented voice spaces, kind of copying Clubhouse, and they've implemented what was the other one? Like the short videos, Fleets. Yeah, it was Fleets. They were copying TikTok and stuff, which was ironic because TikTok is a copy of Vine, which Twitter had, and then didn't implement very
I do
effectively.
recall, him, Jack, doing an interview and saying one of his big life lessons was to, when you have something that's a good idea, but maybe it just hasn't hit yet, especially at a big company where you have like the funding and stuff, is to not give up on that, because he said they might have left Vine too early. Like they should have just kept going with it. You know what I mean?
Well, I do love the phrasing that they might have left Vine too early. I was like, Vine was a good platform. It was doing great. They just didn't. I think it was one of those things where they looked at it and felt that they didn't. I don't think they really knew what to do with it, and I think fleets have now stopped because I don't think they knew what to do with that either.
Mm-hmm.
And they they just kind of mismanaged it. Because
Yeah.
if you manage that properly, there's not a lot technically that's that different between Vine and TikTok. Maybe like the suggestion algorithm is different, but like plenty of people loved Vine, and
Yeah.
obviously the use case was worked out because TikTok is blowing up.
Yeah, well, one of the things I did read about TikTok, and you can tell when you engage in it, is that you nailed it. The algorithm. Pretty much everyone who's like a researcher or computer scientist that's analyzed it said that that algorithm is unbelievable. Whatever they're doing in order to serve up the right ad, I mean, the right video at the right time, it seems to be much more advanced than anything else that's out there.
Huh.
So something about the algorithm. It's a
Yeah.
relationship. But you know, a lot of this stuff with tech, people ask us, why did this company become successful or that company? Gosh, it's like the product, the timing, the culture, the innovate. It's like almost all those little things lined up just perfectly for some of these companies and just took off. Even though you can go back 10 years and someone else tried it, right? Like I hear this all the time where someone will say like, wow, why didn't I think of that? I was like, hey, 10 companies thought of that 10 years ago and I can probably go find the articles about it. It just wasn't the right time. Like people weren't receptive to it, right? So
I don't
there's
know.
like a lot of components to all this stuff.
Yeah. I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with the new CEO. It's Parag Agarwal. According to news reports, he was formerly the CTO, now stepping up into the CEO role. I had not known a ton about Mr. Agarwal before this, so I looked into him, and he formerly worked at Microsoft Research before joining Twitter, which
Yep.
to us in the field, Microsoft Research is a big deal. It's to some extent kind of like the modern Bell Labs.
Yeah, they're amazing. They do amazing research over there. We know people in that space and have known them for over a decade, and it's phenomenal. So that was really cool to hear. The other thing I would point out is that he's very good friends with Jack. They've been collaborating like closely. Like people say stuff like, "Oh, they work together," and sometimes that just means like every once in a while you might pitch a project or something. But apparently, they have actually built not only a close working relationship on projects and what the future would look like for Twitter, but also a friendship. So I think
Yeah,
that kind of plays into all of this.
yeah. And for context, for people who aren't familiar with Microsoft Research, obviously they've been working on the Hololens. They've worked on quite a few other things. They were one of the first people to integrate multi-touch touch surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Before Apple released iPhone and their multi-touch devices, we were seeing prototypes that were able to do the same thing within Microsoft well before that. Which isn't to say that anybody copied anybody. It was just it's a natural thing for people to kind of produce at the same time. In addition, Mr. Agarwal also headed up Twitter's Project Blue Sky, which was a project to develop a decentralized protocol for social networks. So it's basically Web3 for Twitter.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where they are with that. I don't know if he's going to be taking that up the chain with him now that he's CEO and looking at kind of a decentralized hosting process for Twitter. It'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, there's another component to this as well. He and his wife are a power couple now. Dude, she's the I don't know if you know this, she's a general partner over at Andreessen Horowitz. So you got like the
Oh,
CEO of
I did not
Twitter,
know
and
that.
she's a general partner in biotech, I think, at Andreessen Horowitz. So it's like this is really exciting. There's also one other thing that I think is really, really interesting and important for people to know is Brett Taylor is now the chairman of the board of Twitter. He is also the co-CEO of Salesforce. So if you're not familiar with Brett Taylor, he's been doing some really great stuff in Silicon Valley. He started his career early and helped create Google Maps. And then from Google Maps, started a company, sold that company to Facebook, ended up becoming CTO of Facebook, left Facebook, started another company, sold that to Salesforce. And all of the different companies that he's built and everything has kind of led him to this point where he's been mentored and become friends with Mark Benioff, who is the CEO of Salesforce, who started it in 1999. Well, Mark Benioff's philosophy is that big business should do good for society. And you can read all about this and dig into it and stuff like that. And he's really pushed this for a really long time. And he has a long history of this in his family. Everyone has been successful in the different areas that they've pursued, including, I think like his great grandfather was a prosecutor and worked on huge cases, at the Supreme Court and all this kind of stuff. And you can learn all about this. He had a great interview at Code this year. You can Google it. But anyways, what this looks like to me is a changing of the guards, walking away from the traditional founder CEO, who invented the idea of Twitter and created Twitter, but not necessarily maybe the right person at this time in our existence to kind of grow Twitter and put it to where it is. So my
Mm-hmm.
big prediction here is that we're going to see a lot of change. We're going to see a lot of cleanup. I think that we're also going to see a potential, I don't know. I think that Twitter could sell in the future as well. I think if they cleaned it up, I think the right big company might pick them up and make them a part of them or something. Like I just feel change in the air, and so I'm very excited to see what happens over the next 6 months and kind of follow what Parag and Brett Taylor as chairman of the board are going to do with this company.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. I feel like, and I've said multiple times that on this podcast that I feel like within a company, culture is destiny. And you and I both have commented that the culture is the kind of thing that flows downward from leadership. And Jack Dorsey felt like a hands off CEO. And I could feel that in the product that everything seemed very hands off. The company was kind of disengaged. Like we set up this platform. Here you go. If Parag Agrawal is a little bit more proactive, we could see some more growth and some moves within Twitter, which could lead a variety of ways. And I think that could be. I think that would be good for Twitter. And we'll also see how Brett Taylor, as the co-CEO of Salesforce, how his influence kind of affects things also.
And remember, there were a couple big companies that wanted to buy Twitter back in the day, but the reason why they didn't make that purchase was because of how toxic it was, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Disney, Salesforce, a couple others looked at it and thought, wow, there's a lot of data here, there's a lot of information here. This could be useful for our platforms. And ultimately, the toxicity was the big problem. And I know that Parag, I heard on an interview, is that's like one of the priorities. Obviously, is toxicity, bots, all that kind of stuff. And being such a brilliant, he has a PhD as well in computer science, is being kind of like a brilliant AI researcher, scientist, former Microsoft researcher. I suspect that they are going to put some resources toward solving some of these problems that you and I have outlined. And I would love to look in the rearview mirror 5 years from now and be like, wow, Twitter's just like a place for information and discussion, and like 80 or 90% of that toxicity just disappeared. That'd be great if they can figure
Yeah.
that out. If not, I think they'll get sold and someone will find a way to use them for whatever they need it for when it comes to growing their either B2B or B2C business.
Yeah, I think one of my predictions is we're going to see some new efforts in ways that hasn't been done before. One of the biggest telling points for me, for Twitter and social media in general, is kind of the lack of will to really tackle these problems. It seems like
Uh-huh.
they'll do kind of they'll pay it lip service and say we're announcing a new council to like talk about all the things that we aren't going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we'll see some steps. Now, I don't know how aggressive it'll be. I don't think it will necessarily be super aggressive out of the gate, and I don't think it's going to completely transform the character of Twitter. But I think there might see more some more steps taken to try to calm things down and have a little bit more of a civil space for people to interact with each other.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about this next topic that you have here, which I love the title. I love what this is called, Grinch
Yeah.
Bots. It's like perfect for the holiday season. You want to tell us a little bit about Grinch Bots? I know you're doing some research, and I kind of have a feeling this stuff's been around for a while.
Yeah. Grinch bots have been around for a while. So, scalpers have been around for as long as I can remember. As Grinch bots are basically the modern way in which scalpers operate. So they are algorithms that scalpers use to buy up stock of anything that happens to be in demand. So right now, that's PlayStation 5s and graphics cards and whatever the hottest holiday toys are. But they also are using them to buy up like event tickets for like sporting events or concerts or whatever it happens to be. And then they do what scalpers do is they resell them. So that's why if you want to go and to buy a PS5 somewhere, you've got to spend, its MSRP, I think is around $500, and
Uh huh.
they're selling everywhere, including on Amazon for like over 1,000. And these people have stock. They are buying all these things. They have stock available, and they're just marking them up and reselling them. They're inserting themselves as middlemen. So some congressional representatives have gotten together and they're proposing some legislation that are targeting these Grinch bots and kind of reduce their impact on our economy because they're just kind of leeches that are inserting themselves and not really providing any value to the process. So, what the legislation would do is it allow the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to sue scalpers or bot creators with the idea that if they can crack down on some of the bigger offenders, then it will allow more of these products to flow through to consumers at MSRP. So we'll see how well if this can get out of committee. This is very, very early on, but
Mm-hmm.
it's promising. What are your thoughts so far?
I think it's terrible for the consumer. I I'm super bummed when
The
I hear
Grinch
this.
bots or the legislation?
No, the Grinch bots.
Okay.
um, the you and I work in user experience, and think about this experience. Your kid says, "Oh, I'd really love to have this Lego set." They say, "Oh, the Lego set's available on December 1st," and then you log in to go purchase this Lego set, and they're all gone. This has happened to me. This has happened to a lot of people that I know. And then an hour later, you just go look on eBay, and there it is, posted $100
Hmm.
more with a ship date that's 2 weeks from the point in which you make purchase, which means that they already know that they don't have the product, meaning they
Yeah.
bought the product, but the product hasn't actually been shipped to them yet, and from there it needs to be shipped to you. So
Yeah.
it sucks. It's terrible. I would imagine that if you talk to leadership at retailers, they would feel the same way. They wouldn't say like, "Oh, I'm so glad that all my product got um, purchased really, really quickly," because they're looking at the long term, right? When you're Walmart, your
Hmm.
Target and stuff, you want to have customers for decades. You want children that shop in the stores and get products from your stores to have their children come to your stores. They're not looking for just a quick buy, like someone who's selling 10 products on eBay, right? And so it's
Hmm.
really bad for everybody. And I've gotten caught up in it myself. It's frustrating. I didn't know they were called Grinch bots. I love that name, but I hope that this gets worked out. I hope that someone quickly puts in legislation for this. I'll tell you a quick story. For the last couple of years, and I know this has been going on for over 5 years now, the last couple of years, I have not been able to get a campsite in California. It is super frustrating. You know
Oh
how
yeah.
much I love to go camping just for a couple of days, right? You leave on a Friday morning, come
Hmm.
back on a Sunday, couple fires, hanging out by the beach, whatever it is. Back in the old days, I'd grab my surfboard and you and me and a bunch of people would go and we'd go camping and we'd surf or hang out or do whatever. And we would just buy campsites, a couple of months, maybe a month in advance or 2 months in advance. And then we'd go have this adventure. Now, if you don't do it exactly at like midnight, 6 months in advance, you won't get anything because there's these bots that go through and buy huge plots of camp spots because there's a lot of companies that do adventures, and those adventures
Hmm.
require them to have a lot of camp spots in order to get a bunch of customers that are going to come out and where they kind of cook for you, they give you a camp spot, they give you everything and just give you a weekend adventure. Well, that's what California is all about because we have so many amazing places like Big Sur and stuff where people want to go do that. But what it's done is it's made it so that the average family or average person who wants to just go and camping for the weekend, they just can't. And
Oh
even
yeah.
when they do walk-ups, I mean, it's super stressful, right? Because you work a full-time job and then you're like, "Oh, now I gotta pack up my car, jam over there, get there at like, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and stand in line in hopes I get a spot. And if I don't get a spot, I just drive back home." Right? It's
Yeah.
super frustrating. So this is the same thing happening but in a different segment. And I think you and I were talking about this earlier when we were doing kind of a pre discussion. Is when you were reminding me that they used to do this on eBay when they used to have eBay snipe, right?
Hmm.
Where they'd snipe out stuff like 10 seconds or a second before it's about to close. A bot would go in and buy it quickly for you. So this frustrates me, as you can tell. I feel like this needs
Oh
to be
yeah.
resolved quickly.
Yeah, I think it's bad for everybody, right? These sniper or these scalpers are not doing anything useful, right? It's just they're just taking advantage of the system. I think that it would be great if this can get figured out. I have some concerns about the legislation, the form that it's taking, because I don't know how enforceable it's going to be.
Yeah.
Number one, it requires the FTC to take proactive action. So for them to actually allocate resources depends on their funding, which means if they get defunded, which is not that uncommon with certain administrations, then they just aren't going to have the time and money in order to do this, which has
Mhm.
already happened with the IRS, which is one of the reasons why tax revenues have been so down. The other issue is that a lot of these scalpers, the bots themselves, they're out of country, right? They're operating from other
True.
countries where they were outside of the jurisdiction of the U.S. government, and because these are civil cases, not criminal, it's going to be much more difficult to get collaboration across agencies in order to do anything about it. And then third is that for a lot of these companies or these scalpers and stuff, they're probably operating under shell organizations where if they do get sued, they'll just fold and then organize into a new entity and go back to what they were doing. Or even if they are shut down, it'll be like with a lot of the torrent sites where somebody else will just step into their wake. So I think it will probably help and it will cut things down a little bit. But I think that assume this can even get passed, that it'll end up being, just the first step in kind of addressing this. But I think it's extremely important to address it. I think the best thing that anybody can do is for Amazon and Walmart and eBay and some of these other sales channels to cap the resale value at maybe a little bit above MSRP.
That's a great idea. The other thing I thought about was like, I mean, they have enough logic now that they can say, this credit card can only purchase X number of units, right? I mean, because
Yeah,
I mean, are they using a ton of different credit cards?
yeah, they can very easily do that, especially because a lot of times you just go and purchase a bunch of. You could probably spoof it, right? You set up, and you could probably spoof it. You just set up your own like gift card company, right? That generates
Uh-huh.
codes that have a certain amount of money associated with it, and then you just go out there and you pepper it like a shotgun blast. So each purchase is using a different gift card code.
Hey, can I tell you like a little side story, a little fun story I think our listeners might like? In the early 2000s, a couple of friends and I had decided to go to LA during Christmas time. So LA is pretty fun. Like if you go out to like Melrose or you go to Beverly Hills or in those places, I mean, they do like amazing decorating. And so we were like, oh, let's go to LA. Let's go to Disneyland for one day. Then let's go to Beverly Hills, go check out all the lights and stuff, go to Melrose, just goof off in LA. You and I have done this. It's fun because there's just a lot of stuff to do down there. On the way back, I was on I-5 and there was a guy, I think it was near Fresno. Like it felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. You know how I-5 is? It's just all dirt everywhere you look. And there's
Mm-hmm.
this guy sitting there with this tiny little table. And on the middle of the table was a Tickle Me Elmo. And it had a sign that says, one Tickle Me Elmo left, $500. And he was just sitting on I-5 on the freeway as if like, you pull over on the side of the freeway there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I drove by and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. But people who live in LA that are going to visit family in San Francisco, there's gonna be one person who's gonna stop and go, we wanted this thing. I'm just gonna do it and spend $500 on a Tickle Me Elmo. But like, I mean, this stuff has been around forever of people trying to buy and resell stuff. But this is just the stuff you're talking about is just all next level.
It is, and it's unfortunate. And I hope that Tickle Me Elmo has a good resale value these days because too many people spent way too much money on it. And that's the way I look at a lot of this stuff. As far as like a PlayStation 5, sure, I'd like to get one. I'm not paying $1,200 for it.
Exactly.
Uh, and it and with the shortages, the silicon shortage, the supply chain issues, the shipping crisis, which doesn't feel like that much of a crisis anymore right now because I got everything I already received everything that I bought on Black Friday, which is hilarious. But it's something that needs to get handled because it can only get worse if it isn't.
Agreed. Well, hey, let's talk about this next topic here, which is super interesting as well, because you and I always, love things that are related to NASA since we work there. Private space stations are on the way. So, a NASA report was released detailing NASA's plan to retire the International Space Station, the ISS, and allow it to be replaced by a commercial space station. I think this is a good thing, honestly. Like I've listened to a lot of interviews, D, with people who work in. Drawing a blank on the governmental body that actually makes the decision on this is not just NASA. It's another one. But anyways, and they were saying that if you think about it, being hyper focused for NASA on research and maybe long distance travel, like getting to Mars or building a base on the moon, that kind of stuff, is more effective for NASA and for government dollars, and better to just invest into companies that can build the things that they need in space. And I think from a talent perspective, you're probably more likely these days. Back in the old days, it was like the geniuses, remember, in like the 60s and 70s would go work at NASA.
Mhm.
That's what you do if you are like from MIT and you have this amazing engineering mind, you go to NASA and you build amazing things, right? But now with the tech field and the way things are going, you're more likely to get those people in industry. So if
Mhm.
there are companies like, Blue Origin and Boeing and Lockheed and SpaceX and all these other companies doing this stuff, I think they're more likely to grab this amazing talent and probably end up with a better product at the end. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think it's interesting. What's important to me is that NASA, even though it's not a NASA or government space station, that NASA is still able to access these space stations in order to perform research.
Yeah.
And that's because a lot of the research that comes out of these government agencies, NASA in particular, has had a kind of a transformational effect on everything that we do, including things like cell phones and wireless communications and all kinds of things.
Yeah, and don't forget
So,
space ice cream as well, D.
yeah, I couldn't forget that.
Do you like that
Anyway,
stuff? Remember we used to buy that stuff over at the NASA shop? Did you like the taste of that space ice cream?
I don't recall, so probably not.
You probably were
Um,
the only person that didn't buy the space ice cream. Anyways, I
I
think it
tried it.
tasted pretty good.
I think I tried it once or twice. Is that the dots?
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought it was weird. Anyway, it's just
Sorry
like
to derail you.
I don't know. Sometimes when people like develop things for the specific purpose of it, like not going bad or something, and then they try to
Uh-huh.
sell it as like, oh, hey, this is better. I'm like, no, it's just designed not to go bad. It's kind of like kind of like IPAs. It's like it was never designed to be tasty. It's designed to not go bad.
Dude, you just said that. What's funny is I don't like IPAs and I have to drop off a box of stuff for you, as you know, next week. And I
Uh-huh.
put a bunch of IPAs in there for you because I didn't want them. So now I'm thinking you don't want them either.
Well, Christine will drink them, so you're set.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Well, here's the thing, right? So the public access to a lot of this information, or a lot of this research that comes out, is pretty critical in order to continue to move forward. So if a lot of this is locked behind some kind of IP wall by private companies, then I think that's something to be a little bit concerned about, because there's so much stuff that we know of, just basic research and more applied research, where within these private companies, where people don't know what to do with it, so it just gets buried. Right? There's all these amazing technical developments that nobody knows how to productize, so it just languishes. So I'm hoping that that doesn't happen.
Hmm.
And if we can have, what I'd really love is if there was some modification to like the patent system, where if it doesn't get productized or commercialized over a period of time, then other people can access it, even if there is a some level of fee involved, but just allowing access to the IP in some way, so that the user or the public can benefit from it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know that NASA and all these other agencies have the Office of Innovation, and in those spaces, they actually try to license out a lot of the technology that's created that's maybe not being used, but was generated by research,
Hmm.
and at a reasonable rate, to help industry grow and stuff. This is kind of like a whole new era because NASA getting away from producing all this stuff in house. Um, I actually really think that they're going to be hyper focused on what they really want to do and probably do a better job at it. That's just my theory. I could be wrong, but I
Hmm.
think in their contracts, I would hope, D, and I would guess that the contracts say that if we're going to award you this contract, obviously we get to go and use the space station for research and innovation and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
just as much as everybody else. Otherwise, it becomes privatized space, which is just strange.
Yeah, it's just the kind of thing where if Blue Origin, for example, which is developing their own space station like Orbital Reef, if
Uh-huh.
they're doing research on things and they develop, the Blue Origin's associated with Amazon, it's Jeff Bezos' company, and they develop something that could revolutionize commercial air travel, but they're not in the business of commercial air travel, so it just kind of sits, and it takes an extra 10 years for somebody else to perform that research and come to that same understanding. That's something I prefer to avoid.
Yeah, they always talk about this stuff happening by like 2030 and that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
when you watch the videos or the reports on this stuff, it seems like this technology is advancing much faster than that. These must just be associated with the timing in which they would allow that stuff to go up. But I would imagine that you have to test that stuff as well, right? So then people like Blue Origin need to put
Yeah.
this stuff up in space, test it out, see how it works, bring it back down. before they would actually do an official launch and kind of replacement of the International Space Station, right?
Well, I mean, it takes time to build a space station that's going to be up there for ideally decades, right? So we
Yeah.
should point out that one of the reasons why the International Space Station is being retired is because it's aging out. Like
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it can only be maintained in space for a certain amount of time. Same thing happened with other space stations before it. So it's not as though NASA and the other partnering organizations from different parts of the world could really keep the ISS going forever. This has to be replaced at some point. So this relative to the alternative, like allowing private companies to do so, assuming that it's going to be within reason, and we're not just going to have like a Dyson sphere circulating around us, which is like go watch some Star Trek if you're not familiar with the Dyson
Yeah.
sphere. But yeah, we just don't want like a tons of space junk up there, which is the same concern with like delivery drones and things. So as long as it's implemented properly, I think it's helpful. I'm just thinking about like I don't, and I know this happens. I know a lot of people are probably thinking like, oh, if they develop something revolutionary, then they're gonna implement it. I'm like, trust me, they don't always. And the
Yeah.
reason why is because the people who are running these companies, they only have so much bandwidth, they only have so much mental bandwidth, and they cannot physically manage multiple different major efforts at the same time. So some of the ones that look like they have a lot of promise, but they don't have expertise in something, like in the example I said, it just becomes like, well, I'll get to it eventually. And then 10, 15 years go down the road and something amazing is just sitting there on a shelf or like in a warehouse, Raiders of the Lost Ark style, and nobody just gets around to it. It
Mhm.
happens all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, even when we worked at NASA, we worked in a research environment. And I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, there are so many research papers being published, so much
Mm-hmm.
stuff being kind of innovated in all these different labs. How are they going to like properly use this stuff? How do we ensure that the people who are trying to build, for example, the Mars rover and that kind of stuff is going to get to this interesting insight that could be useful for that, right? There's a whole
Mm-hmm.
mechanism for that, but a lot of it does get lost only because, one person builds on one thing and then the other person builds upon that and then someone else jumps in and sometimes stuff gets replicated and there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot to it. So this is a changing of the guard. This is like a whole new way of thinking because instead, NASA will just say, here's your check. Give us what
Yeah.
we're looking for. We'll spec this thing out and tell you everything that we need, and you go and produce it.
Yeah. And that's a good point also because a lot of the stuff that got developed by NASA for commercial or private use didn't get implemented in the way that it did. Yeah, I mean, you worked on and you developed a new system for search and rescue.
Yep.
And I don't know what happened with that after you guys developed and patented it, but it was vastly superior to the systems that existed at the time,
Mhm.
and it probably took way too long in order to get into the hands of actual search and rescue teams.
Yeah, I mean, at the time in which we created that and did the patents and everything, it was my first patent and my first lesson on like how they actually like get this stuff out there. They would do these demo days, and you would invite things like the Undersecretary of State and like all these different things, these different people to these demo days, and then you'd have all the technology set up. And at the time, there was a big push for search and rescue and all that kind of stuff. It was post 9/11, and so we showed off this technology and showed them how it works and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's funny because I never heard anybody say the word spatialized audio back then, except for the people who worked in the audio lab where I work. Now,
Hmm.
spatialized audio is a common term being used for headphones being sold by all the major retailers.
Oh yeah,
So think about that. That was
20 years.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? That's a long time to see something kind of progress and move to where it needs to go. But in that same vein, I do want to talk about our last topic of the day because it does have a little bit of a connection to NASA as well. Um, so, scientists have figured out how to build tiny living robots that know how to reproduce. So this is super interesting. They're called xenobots. And basically, what it is with the help of a supercomputer, scientists have built tiny machines made of biological materials. They can live for weeks. And these xenobots could eventually be used for like delivery of drugs inside the body or cleaning up the environment. So basically what they're doing is they're programming a living organism. So this living organism comes from, I believe this came from African frogs, but they create this little living organism and they're able to program it using supercomputers,
Hmm.
and then basically program it to do certain things. They found out that it can actually replicate itself and reproduce, which is really interesting. But what I find most interesting about this, because this is really in the weeds type of technology right now, is back in my days at NASA, we used to put on a big show over at the hangar. So when you're at NASA Ames Research Center, there's a huge hangar where they used to put the blimp in there and all kinds of things. Well, anyways, they would put on a show there once a year, and different labs would come out and they would show off their technology. And one of the big things at the time was nanotechnology. This idea that we can create these tiny little robots that you can drop into people's bodies, like in their bloodstream, and they can maybe go and kill cancer, or they could, hunt for genetic diseases that maybe present early or whatever it is. I mean, million permutations of that research, right? This reminded me of it a little bit because the difference is that nanotechnology was talking about using like micro uh, robots that were made out of like metal and silicon and things like that.
Hmm.
At the time, this is all organic. So this
Yeah.
is like the next level of like, hey, guess what? You have like a tumor or something going on in your body. We put these inside there because we program them to go and eat the tumor and kill it. There's definitely possibilities there. I mean, that sounds pretty crude, but like the reality is that that's kind of where the hope is for a lot of this research.
Well, yeah. I mean, I for one welcome our new robot overlords.
I know.
This does feel like it feels like a natural progression as far as kind of robotics and materials is instead of using these non-organic materials, metals and polymers and things like that, to be using organic materials, especially within if it's being used within the human body. If you can, obviously you can manipulate kind of the DNA signature within that. You can establish foreign bodies that aren't going to be attacked by the body's immune system.
Yep.
Now, the fact that they can reproduce, that's I feel like I've seen this movie before, and if not, then it needs to exist. Where I mean, reproduction implies evolution, um,
Absolutely.
and I believe when reading this, it said that it could reproduce only kind of in the way that it was programmed.
Correct.
But I've seen The Matrix, and there are exceptions within that. The sum of the remainder of an unbalanced equation becomes expressed at some point.
Yep.
So this is fascinating. Some part of me is thinking to myself, I was always looking forward to kind of being around for the end of the human race, but
You know what it
at the same
reminded me of?
time,
It reminded me of D on that same vein. It reminded me of Jurassic Park when
yeah.
I forgot what his character name was, but theologist. I think he was like a theologist, but he says something like, we don't do something because we should. We do it because we can, or something. Remember? And then he said, nature will
Mhm.
find its way. He was basically kind of saying like, you think you have control on this, you have your hands wrapped around it, but in reality you can't control nature when it unfolds like this.
True. Yeah, so it's unpredictable. I mean, that's the nature of any material. This is one of the reasons why you have to go slow and you have to be careful about implementation. But at the same time, if you can build a machine out of biological materials that are can be engineered to avoid being rejected by the body's immune system, that means you could eventually probably create synthetic hearts and livers and
Hmm.
kidneys and lungs and all these other things, which are essentially machine systems within a organic android, essentially. And who knows, maybe someday the Amazon Astro robot that comes around will literally be like a dog,
Yeah.
a dog that can speak to you and take pictures of you and bring you a beer.
Yeah, I mean, I just read an article about how all these materials that you're talking about, a lot of research in material science right now is about how to get away from polymers and stuff. So people
Yeah.
are creating organic type materials that are flexible, that won't die, won't rot, won't whatever. You know what I mean? Everyone's really looking to get around this whole like
Yeah.
issue with plastics and metals. And so this is just a new growing area, but it's very early. I mean, it
Mhm.
feels like things have moved quickly in this space, but this stuff takes a long time. And there's regulation on what you can do and can't do and all that kind of stuff. So this stuff will unfold, and I'm sure there'll be more stories about this in the coming years. But this one just caught my attention just because it really reminded me of nanotechnology and how we are getting into this new space of maybe being able to solve some big problems in
Yeah.
completely new ways.
Well, just from a material science perspective, like I wonder what are the base materials that are being used to produce these kinds of things, if they're more readily available than
Yeah.
things like aluminum and some of these polymers or rare earth elements and stuff like that. That would be a significant advance.
Exactly. Hey, Dee, this was great. I thought these were good topics for the day, and I hope all the listeners out there really enjoyed them. One of the things that Demetrius and I are toying with and playing with is this idea of every once in a while doing a kind of, I don't know, new tech inventions kind of podcast. So it would show up every so often on our normal drop day. And basically, because Dee and I are researchers, what happens is we end up running across a tremendous amount of research, stuff that the general public will not ever search for or notice, but super interesting. And stuff like this nanotechnology we were talking about today. And we thought maybe every once in a while, let's do a podcast where all we do is talk about these crazy things, right? Just to kind of see if our listeners would be interested in it. So if you are interested in this type of podcast, you can send us a message on Twitter. We would love it. That would be super helpful, and give us some ideas of what you're looking for, and we'll dig into it for you because we really enjoy doing this. But I wanted to thank everyone so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. As I always say, we'll be posting links to many of these sources that we reference on Twitter. So you can follow us on Twitter at the X Podcast One. That's the X Podcast and the number one. If you like this podcast, found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. I just realized yesterday there were some nice comments and reviews on the Apple Podcast Player that I missed from later in the summer. So for those who did those reviews, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we will be digging into some of the topics that you recommended in there in the future. So I appreciate it. All right, everyone, you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week.